Happy Friday, everybody. Congratulations. You survived another week on Life on Lockdown. Today, we have a very special guest, and I'm going to get right into it. We're talking to somebody who's going to tell us all about perfectly hidden depression or getting behind the mask of perfectionism. I want to give you guys a little bit of a warning here because this is a very serious subject. We're talking about depression. So if you're struggling with suicidal thoughts, seek immediate professional treatment ASAP. And if you're younger, I know there's some young people watching the show too, please let an adult know that you're in big emotional trouble. The purpose of today's show, help others become more comfortable with vulnerability in everyday life and to break free from the perfectionism that masks your depression. I know so many creative people suffer from this, so let's see if you are actually secretly hiding in depression here. So today's guest is a psychologist. She's been in private practice for over 25 years. She also has a podcast called Self Work and a YouTube channel, so please check her out. She's the author of the book Perfectly Hidden Depression. She's written for numerous publications, including Huffington Post, Psychology Today, The Mighty Psych Central, the Gottman blog, Psychologies, Stigma Fighters, The Good Men Project, This Is My Brave, and many others. This is Margaret Rutherford, and you guys can check her out at drmargaretrutherford.com. She's allowed me to call her Margaret. Margaret, welcome to the show.
Sure, of course. Hi, Chris. Thank you.
Yeah, Margaret.
Oh, my
Yes.
God. Should I bow? Should I bow?
Okay, I want to give a quick shout out to Mo Ismail, who made this happen. He's the one who connected us, and you were so gracious to send me your book, so I'm holding the book here. We'll give people information on how to get your book later, okay? It is same title, Perfectly Hidden Depression, and I just want to get right into it. The thing that you had said in the book was that you see yourself as a conduit between those who've been hurt and found healing and those that are still lost and hurting. Tell me a little bit about how or why you describe yourself that way or your role.
Well, I've been doing therapy for a long time now. And, when I first started out, Chris, I thought, okay, I have the answers. And because I was in graduate school and I knew what I needed to know. And well, sure, I wasn't in practice for long before I figured out that simply was not true. That I
Mm-hmm.
had was in front of me as a psychologist was a lot of other kinds of cases, other kinds of struggles, other kinds of experiences that obviously in graduate school I had absolutely no experience with. So what I feel like after all this time is that what really therapists have to offer you we offer a holding environment, we offer a space where people can risk being vulnerable, can risk stretching themselves, can risk being able to look at things maybe they've been very afraid to look at. But the idea of me being a conduit is this: let's say someone comes in whose child has died, and so we work through that, and I try to help them to the best of my ability. And I watch their progress and watch what is beneficial to them and what isn't, and what they learn in the process. Maybe 2 years later, someone else comes in whose child has died. And so I take, not obviously it's anonymous, but I learn from that experience. And it's almost like what I learned there and what the patient learned, I can offer to the next patient
Mm,
and say, your case may not be exactly like this. And I don't necessarily say I'm quoting from so and so from 2 years
right.
ago. It's just your base of experience. The longer you practice, it grows because you're simply learning, guiding, watching, observing, being a part of healing. And that way you can pass on the wisdom that other people have learned the very hard way. And you can help the next person perhaps have a little bit of an easier time, perhaps not, but at least they know they're not alone. When I say, well, you're certainly, I've heard this before, and let me share some of the details of it with you. And so I think people feel often that what they are experiencing that no one else has. A lot of people don't talk to them about it. A lot of people shy away from actually people's lives getting out of control. And so knowing that there was somebody else who was seated right in this office and talking with me that learned through the experience that obviously a death of a child is a horrible tragedy, but even through that experience there are things that I can offer because of working with that other person. And it's almost as if it's a bridge, it's a conduit that I can be, that I'm very aware of all the time.
Mm. I really connected to how you described that because in a business term, and I don't want to get too businessy because this is really like mind work that we want to get into, but if you look at it, it kind of takes you away from the spotlight that you
Yes,
have seen people who have found ways to solve their problems and people who have just discovered they have a problem, and you're able to connect those stories and people together. I have to ask you on a personal question as you're
sure, of
dealing
course.
with a lot of people who are dealing with tremendous grief, that are hurt, that are in pain. How do you process that? And it's got to take an impact on you, I must guess here.
It does. Let me go back for just a second.
Hmm.
It doesn't mean that therapists don't have certain techniques and certain understandings of whether it's a diagnostic category like bipolar illness or depression or anxiety. Certainly we have techniques that are helpful, but what you still learn at the gut level, you understand what it's like to be someone with panic. You understand what it's like to be someone who's been sexually abused. You
Hmm.
understand because you've worked in a very deep way with this other person, and that's what you build on and can offer anybody else. Personally, I'm a therapist because I got really good therapy. Therapy was not my first profession. Psychology, I was a professional singer in my
Oh
20s,
wow.
and I got a lot of therapy because I needed it. And my life was pretty chaotic for about a decade, and
Hmm.
I got some really wonderful help. I got some bad therapy as well, but the
Hmm.
good therapy I got really helped me figure things out and begin to extricate myself from situations where I was actually pretty destructive. So the way I handle that now, I'll tell you a story. I'm a storyteller. My last year in graduate school, I went to my supervisor and I said, I'm really bothered by something. And she said, What is it? And I said, all my colleagues have decided that they're going to be a certain kind of therapist. They're going to be a cognitive behavioral therapist, or they're going to be a Cohuttian therapist, or they're going to be a family systems therapist. And I said, I studied all those theories along with them, and a lot of them make sense. But I kind of look for people's strengths when they come in and try to remind them of their strengths. Then we work on their vulnerabilities. And she just started laughing. She said, That's a pretty good approach. So just because people are in front of me who are demoralized, I mean, obviously, people don't come into therapy that they're not struggling in some way. Because they're demoralized doesn't mean that I see that they have no strengths. Often they really do. And so we work together to help them sometimes accept their vulnerabilities that they even exist, as in perfectly hidden depression, but also so that they know that they need to remember what kind of strengths they have. And when is a time in their life when they have overcome something that they can now link to this and say, oh, I did get through X, and that's going to help me through Y. So you want to help people take their time and take the time that it needs to begin to really address what's going on, whether there are roots in their childhood, or rather there are things that are going in their current relationships that are problematic, or whatever the reason. You want to the way I take care of myself is, yes, of course, sometimes I go home and I'm concerned about somebody who may be on the brink of something really pretty despairing, and I'll reach out to them and say, "How are you doing?" In 2 or 3 days. And so, it, but I really believe that people are wanting to heal and people are wanting to grow. And so, actually coming into therapy is a very courageous thing in and of itself. So, because you are risking, you're letting in this perfect stranger into who you are and saying, let's talk about this openly, and let me help you find your strengths. And then, yes, my husband will tell you sometimes when I walk in the door, he knows it's just not a good time to talk to me for 15 or 20 minutes. I need to
Right.
decompress. And
Right.
so I'll just kind of go, give me a minute. And I'll go in the sunroom or something and just kind of sit and think about, all right, what strengths does that person have? Do I need to reach out to them in the morning, or do I just need to give them the message that they can do this, and that I'm there for them if they can't?
Hmm. I feel this way because I was talking to my therapist about this years ago. It's like your job is to listen to people's problems, and if you
Right.
listen to enough problems, it can weigh heavy on your soul. I have to imagine, like I was saying, my wife will and I will watch a documentary, and it's hopefully presented truthfully, and then we see the tragic stories of people, and it breaks our heart, like what's going on in America right now, all across America and the world.
Yes,
And you
exactly.
find out about these stories, and then it's just sometimes it can make you feel quite hopeless that we think that human beings are better. And I'm a humanist, and I want to believe in the good in the world, but some of the information you get out there is just bad, and you're dealing with it on a very intimate personal level.
Right.
I just like, if it were me, I'd just be in the room, and I'm not a crier, I would just be crying, and it's like I don't know how to deal with this. It's so heavy.
Well, I think what you have to remember is that if I'm going to help someone deal with it, then I can have an emotional reaction. I've certainly teared up during sessions, and I have heard some awful stories about what human beings do to one
Mm,
another. Um, so those stay with me. There's some stories that I never tell anyone else because
hmm.
I don't want anyone else to have them stick in their memories like they're stuck in mine.
Oh
Um,
no.
so, um, but I also I have my job is to be there for them, and I think that trumps, that supersedes my need to express it in that moment. And so I may go home and I may, or maybe it may not occur to me until over the weekend that there's something that's nagging at me that I need to work through. And so I'll go on a walk and maybe I'll cry, maybe I'll scream, maybe I'll be really angry. But my good job is to be there for my patient. And if I lose it, then that's not going to help them at all.
Right, right. Okay, this I want to talk a little bit because you said that you love to tell stories, and I think it's
I
an
do.
appropriate way to begin here. Is in the beginning of the book, you talk about Natalie and how that led
Yeah,
you to this idea of perfectly hidden depression, PhD, and the reason why I'm holding this book in my hand. Could you tell us Natalie's story?
sure. Um, Natalie was someone that I saw many years ago. In fact, by the way, I asked Natalie if I could include her story in the book, and she very graciously said I could. I had not been practicing all that long, and but Natalie had come in, and she had some issues from her childhood, which we discussed. But overall, she was a very successful, um, sort of a, you know, one of the professions that you think, okay, you have to be really smart and really good at what you do to succeed in that profession. I won't say which one it is because I live in a small town. But and she mostly came in because she just said she was anxious a lot. She tended to worry a lot, and she wanted to work on that worry and how to contain that worry. And there's a whole technique about the work of worrying and how you can begin to encapsulate it, honor it, but also sort of fence it in somewhat. And that's what we were kind of working on. We did do some family of origin work because she told me some things about her mom that were troublesome. And so, but all in all, she said her relationship was great. She loved her kids. Nothing was wrong with that. Then one afternoon, I got a call from her husband saying, um, in fact, I think we had beepers back then, and my beeper went off. And
Hmm.
he said, I'm really worried about Natalie. There's something amiss. Something is terribly wrong. And I said, well, and he goes, has she been talking about anything in therapy that is unusual? I said, no. He said, she just told me to pick up the kids and take them to her mom's. And um, and I'm concerned about her. Well, I've never done this again, and I had not done this before then. But there was something in my gut that said this doesn't sound right, and so he said, "Would you go check on her?" Again, very unusual.
Right.
But I knew where she lived, or he told me where she lived. I knew the neighborhood, and he gave me the garage code just in case she wasn't outside. She wasn't. And I went in, and I remember feeling like a burglar. The house was extremely quiet, sort of eerily quiet. And I looked around, and her living room was perfectly set up. Little throws were over the pillows and or over the sofa, and there were dishes drying in the sink, and everything was quiet. And I thought, well, what's going on? Of course, I didn't know her home, but I began going down this hall that I sort of assumed was the master bedroom. And I kept calling her name because I didn't want to frighten her. And I walked in, and she was trying to die by suicide. She had almost an empty bottle of vodka by her side and a bottle of benzodiazepines that were also empty. So I called 911, her saying, no, don't call, no, don't call. You don't need to call. And they came and got her. And I remember this sense of just shock as she left, because I thought, I never would have thought that she was suicidal. She never talked about it. She never admitted it. She didn't reveal anything close to that. And I just sat there for a second and then thought, I've got to go home. It's one of those moments that I definitely had to go do some work on me. And obviously we talked after that, and she told me that, she went for treatment for alcohol abuse, and unbeknownst to me, she was also drinking heavily. And when she came back, we did some really great work. But what it opened my eyes to was that her life looked perfect on the outside. And I diagnosed her with anxiety. She
Mm,
was overworked, she was tired, she was overwhelmed. And suddenly I began realizing, wait a minute, this is something different. Now, I would love to tell you that at that moment I said, oh, I'm going to write a book about this. And I didn't, not for years. um, but I began watching for that in my practice. I was so
mm,
much more aware that maybe I needed to ask some different questions. And so when I started writing when I went on social media back in 2012, now, so this is a good 15 years after that,
I see.
um, I started thinking about the Natalies that I treated and what it took to get them to open up. And I just picked a term out of the air and called it perfectly hidden depression. And I entitled the blog post, The Perfectly Hidden Depressed Person, Are You One? At that point, I was really doing great if I got 50 shares. I mean, I was like
Right.
jumping up and down. This went viral. This went
Mhm.
viral. And when it was on the Huffington Post about 2 weeks later, I forgot that I had left my email on the bottom of the post. And Chris, I got
Yikes.
hundreds of
Mm,
emails.
mhm.
This is me. It's like you're in my head. How do you know this happens? No one's ever talked about this. So I was so struck by that I thought, okay, I'm going to go investigate this and find out what's in the popular literature about this perfect looking life and how it might be linked to depression, even suicidality. I found Brene Brown, which of course her writing is incredible. Her research is incredible. I found another book by Terrence Real called I Don't Want to Talk About It, where it was written for men about what he termed covert depression, but I didn't
Mhm.
find anything about women. I found workbooks on how to not be so perfectionistic, but no one was asking the question why, not even Brene Brown, that I could find. So I thought, well, maybe I should ask that question. And in many ways, Chris, this book found me. I'd never wanted to write a book. I was perfectly happy as a therapist, but I decided this is too important to miss. And I began researching, and I really was formulating my ideas at the same time. So I would write a blog post and try to formulate my or form, a better word, in my own mind what exactly I was talking about. So I came up with this syndrome, is what I call it,
Mhm.
of perfectly hidden depression.
Okay. I want to talk about that, but first, I do
Sure.
also want to compliment you as a therapist. Your lighting and your background design is it's very very nice. We have professional people in the creative field. People take note. This is you
Well,
look
it's on
great. You
purpose.
sound great.
It's on purpose. I know I've done plenty of podcast interviews, and
Hmm.
sometimes their background is just like weird. And in fact, I had somebody say, "Well, don't you want to turn your chair around so you're so?" And I said, "No, I want them to look outside." And so I got a
Yeah.
new light, and I figured it all out. So anyway, thank you very much. Though that's very nice. I've done a lot of theater, so
Maybe you'll sing for us later today.
I
Maybe.
tried that. I
Uh,
went to a Zoom birthday party yesterday and I sang and
yeah.
I thought, oh God, I can tell it's been 15 years since I've sung.
Okay. let's get back to the thing here. That
Sure.
the thing I hope everybody's tuning in for is that maybe you are suffering from perfectly hidden depression, and so you've written 10 characteristics. Excuse me, 10 characteristics in the book, and the first one is, this is how you can tell: highly perfectionistic. Okay, this is pretty much everybody that's tuning in, and have a constant critical and shaming inner voice. That's the tricky part.
Yeah.
Can you
Let
expand
let's
on this?
sure. Let's make a distinction that's a very important distinction between striving for excellence, being perfectionistic, where you see it as a process, you see it as a learning experience. I mean, I'm perfectionistic, but I don't have to necessarily always be successful. I can accept a mistake. I can accept that, well, I just didn't study hard enough, or I didn't do my research hard enough. And so it's a learning process where you're more oriented toward the striving, the process, again, to use that word again, rather than the goal or the achievement. The kind of perfectionism that is extant in perfectly hidden depression is fueled by shame and fear, and it's like you've got constantly got this voice in your head saying, well, you're not really good enough. Well, why are you on Chris's show? You don't have much to say. Or blah 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 blah. And it's constant.
Right. Right.
And in fact, it's probably been around for years. And it is controlling your behavior to where you don't believe that if you don't keep the thumb in your back constantly, that you don't have the innate um, character trait of wanting to do well. You have to keep the pressure on. And in fact, I had a therapist ask me many years ago, what if you took the thumb out of your back? And my response was, I'd turn into a slug. So, my fear was that I wouldn't do anything. I just sit around and sort of be. And that's not, the case at all. So there's this huge distinction between striving for excellence, which is process oriented, and then the kind of perfectionism that's very characteristic of perfectly hidden depression, which is all about the avoidance of shame and fear.
So it has a lot to do then with your motivation for perfection. Is that the idea?
What's
So
driving
you're,
it? Yes. What's
yeah,
driving
okay.
it? Hmm.
Now I've talked about this to my audience. I'd love to get your take on this, which
Sure.
is there's just this illusion, this mirage that exists, and you're in the desert of life, and you think that the oasis is there, and that oasis looks like the perfect project, the perfect social media post, the perfect blog post that you put up. And it's crippling for a lot of creative people
You
because
bet it.
we're fearful. We're fearful of people judging us by our peers, confirming what our parents have said to us, one or both parents, that you shouldn't be doing this. You should have gone the route of being a doctor or an accountant, a lawyer, something respectable
A
instead of doing
plumber,
something
something.
creative,
Yeah.
something very respectable. Maybe that's what you should have done. And so it causes people to freeze up in inaction and they don't do
You bet.
anything. Right. So can you expand on that? Maybe give us your thoughts on that.
I heard a long time ago that another definition of procrastination was imperfect perfectionism. And so
Mm,
I think that it is you can just be paralyzed by that because you don't you're so afraid of allowing any vulnerability to show that you just simply don't do anything. Now that's, none of us particularly want to do anything that we don't do well. I mean, if you handed me a pair of skates and said, I want you to put on these pair of skates and skate around the room, I'd say, don't really want to do that because I have
hmm.
terrible balance. So, that's not something I would just jump up and down to do, but
Right.
it goes much farther than that. In fact, even in the writing of the book, I still have enough perfectionism left and enough shame left to where right in the middle of the writing of the book, I thought, I can't do this because I realized that it would be imperfect. And that as soon as I turned it into the publisher, I would think of something I hadn't said, or I'd read a sentence and go, oh my God, why did I say that? Or I would learn
Right.
something I didn't know, or whatever. And it was paralyzing. I just sat for days staring at this screen blinking at me. And finally, I sort of looked at myself in the mirror and said, what are you doing? I mean, you are trying to model for people that it's okay to be vulnerable and that in fact, what I've decided since then is what is sort of one of my mantras at this point is that your vulnerabilities do not define you any more than your strengths do. And that's a huge leap from perfectly hidden depression. But that is one of the goals of people who experience it, that they want to learn. And so I wrote a couple of paragraphs in the book saying, I know this will be an imperfect guide to trying to
Mm,
guide you to being okay with imperfection. And
hmm.
it was a huge breaking point for me. And I just said, okay, there you go. It will be imperfect, and that's okay.
Right. So it sounds to me like you gave yourself permission and admitted it and revealed yourself in a vulnerable way to say,
You
this is the
bet.
best I got for now. And
And I even
maybe
wrote about
creatives,
it. And I even
right.
wrote about it.
And maybe creatives just need to accept that. And I think that's so liberating to say, like, you know what? This represents what I can do at this moment. Tomorrow I'll
Right.
be better. And the next day I'll be better
Right.
than that. But I'm not going to let that be the thing that holds me back from expressing myself.
Or maybe not. Maybe I won't be better tomorrow, but maybe maybe I won't have learned anything. I'll try to be better, but maybe I will,
Hmm.
maybe I won't. I will be who I am tomorrow, and I want to continue to grow and learn, and hopefully some of that will seep in. But it's not a, as all creatives know, it's not like you don't just get better and better and better and better. You have, ups and downs and
Right.
all kinds of things that go awry, and then things that go very well. So it's about knowing that you're okay with that journey. And sometimes I'll never forget, I sang for this guy who really wanted me to sing for him, and he had this sweet gig and in Dallas, and it was would have paid a lot of bills. And I auditioned and I sang the whole night, and then I didn't hear from him for months. And I called him back finally, and I said, what's going on? I really, he goes, you sang flat all night. And I went, oh, well, that's kind of unusual. He goes, well, you did. So, and I just had to wrap around that and say, okay, that was an opportunity missed.
Hmm.
Um, so that acceptance of sometimes you're going to be caught at your most vulnerable is is just part of the creative process, I think, because
Hmm.
there's so much risk in putting yourself out there.
Hmm. Great. Okay, so here's another one. Here's number two.
Sure.
Here's one of the signs that you demonstrate a heightened or excessive sense of responsibility. Like
Yeah,
every job is your job to do and do well,
that's right.
right?
That's
Okay.
right. You've got your hand in the air all the time. I'll do that. I'll take it over. It is a way of distracting yourself in many ways. It's also a way, and this ties in with the third trait, which all these traits are really commingled.
Hmm.
With if I do it, I know it'll be done well.
Hmm.
And so, and especially for people who, let's say, their children are on soccer teams or something, and so they'll say, "Okay, I'll be the person who takes care of snacks." And what they know about themselves is, since they have to do everything perfectly, they no child will go without a snack in soccer season. They just know that, and they'll go to the nth degree to make that happen. But it's also interesting to think about, Chris, is that these folks are also the folks that don't know what to do if they're not doing, if they're not up and doing, and so they're sort of lost when they don't have a role.
Right.
And so they assign themselves roles because it's easier to handle life knowing, yes, I'm the chair of that committee, or yes, I'm in charge of this, or yes, I'm giving the dinner party and I'll cook everything, because they really don't know how to do anything but take on that responsibility. And often, of
Hmm.
course, they also grew up in homes where that was that was their responsibility. These are
Right.
kids who had an alcoholic parent and who had to take care of the kids, or they were natural responsibility takers. So that was probably one of the strategies they devised. I'll just do it. It's what makes me worthwhile.
Right. So in a way, we're avoiding dealing with how we feel and what our needs are by filling
Right.
up all of our time and attention on something else. We're going to
Exactly.
find something else to do. Now, I might
Exactly.
be the weirdo here, but I try not to do anything. I'm just like, I don't know, you guys have that. You need to do that because I got to do my own stuff. So
Yeah.
this begs the question. Are men more likely to exhibit these traits than women, or is it just right down the middle, or are women more likely to do this than men?
I've gotten that question in other interviews, and actually, I didn't talk about that in the book. In the intro, I say it has been my observation through my own clinical practice that this does not necessarily, it's not in the realm of women only or men only. I've had just as many men come in that identify with this as women. And but I think in general, women certainly come to therapy more often than men do. So, again, how much do you trust those numbers? It's always out
Right.
there. Women are more depressed than men, but do women talk about their depression more than men, or admit their depression more than men? Or, how is that information skewed? So I would hold back from saying, oh yes, this is a female problem. In fact, Terrence Real's book, again, I'll mention it. I don't want to talk about it, is an excellent um, a guide to men's depression that in fact, I quoted one of the things he said in the book. He said, if you don't feel it, you live it. Meaning, if you don't get some of those feelings out in the open and work through them, then you're going to live those feelings out without you even being conscious of them. And so it may be that men are more likely to do that. Women are more supportive of one another in our vulnerabilities. So as a rule. But again, a lot of these women that have come to see me, no, not one of their friends knows they're in therapy. Not one of their friends knows they struggle. Not they just don't reveal themselves. So it is a very lonely experience. I was so blessed to have, as I wrote these blog posts and tried to figure out what I was talking about. I would at the bottom of the blog post, I would say, if you think you experience this, would you reach out to me? Would you be willing to be anonymously interviewed? And I had probably in about a 3-month period of time, about 75 people contact me and say I would be willing to do this. About half men and half women, actually.
Hmm.
I filtered out some of them because they didn't really fit, but I did interviews with them, and for about an hour, hour and a half each, sometimes 2 hours, and really delved into their childhood. In fact, those are the stories that the stories in the book are based on, are people I actually talked to or I worked with myself personally.
Hmm.
We had a brain surgeon, a motivational speaker, an advertising exec. I mean, you name it, all these professions, and sometimes stay-at-home parents. So what I noticed was that to a T, when I asked them, well, why would you reach out? I'm unknown to you. In fact, I'm not known to anybody at the time. And, but you're reaching out to help me try to explain this. What's your motivation? And they all said, I don't want anyone else to live the life that I've lived. I cannot tell you how many times I've thought about dying by suicide, or maybe I have attempted, but I feel like nobody knows me. Nobody sees me. I don't allow them to see me. And I am miserable. And
Mm,
I fight. Um, just feeling like my life is, although it looks highly accomplished,
right.
that it's really hasn't, it I I don't feel the human experience. I feel like, as you said a few minutes ago, I'm a doer. I'm just a doer. I'm an accomplisher. That's what defines me.
Hmm. So I think there's an interesting line to draw here, because there are people who have depression that you can tell right away. They're the classic telltale signs.
That's right.
Maybe they're not very social. They're kind of always inward, and you can see that. But the kind that you're talking about, the kind that we don't often recognize, is masked by people who appear on the surface to be very successful, to have accomplished lots of things, to be all put together. They could be like in your book, you talk about the advertising executive, all these busy, successful people. And
Right.
what they're doing, I think, is point three here, which you've already dipped into, which is they detach from these painful emotions by staying in their head and then
Right.
shutting them off, right?
Yeah, these are very analytical people. In
Hmm.
fact, it's been interesting, Chris, because as I've talked with people about the book, I would say at least 2/3 of them have revealed to me, well, no, I haven't done the exercises. And there are over 60 exercises in the book. And I'll say, why not? Well, I wanted to get a mental picture of perfectly hidden depression first.
Hmm.
And I kind of look at them and as kindly as I can, say, so it scares you to do the feeling part? And they said, yeah, it scares the heck out of me to do the feeling part. So, um, That is a real clue as a therapist. If I had one thing to say to any therapist listening, well, how am I supposed to identify these people? There is a mismatch between what someone is talking about and the way they are talking about it. There was a young woman who came in many years ago, well, 5 or 6 years ago. She was a beauty pageant kind of person. So she had eating disorders. And she, about the fourth session, said, "You know, that first session when you asked me if I'd been sexually abused?" And I said, "Yeah." She said, "Well, this really probably isn't a very big deal, but I was raped the week before I went to college. And, I never told anybody. It was a long time ago. And it's so much worse happens to everybody else that, you know." And I stopped her and I said, "Do you realize you're smiling?" I mean, she could have done the beauty pageant wave thing.
Mm,
And I said, "If I turned down the sound and could replay a video of what you just said, you would have looked like you were telling me what you did at work today." I mean, you didn't even, there was no pain, there was no vulnerability, there was no connection with the horror of waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning on the beach, realizing your drink has been um, not spiced, poisoned or
spiked or
whatever.
drugged.
Spiked, yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
And that, and you just get up and go home and start college the next week. I said, "What a terrible experience." And there was a little tear that came to her eye, and she goes, "Well,
Mm,
I've never allowed myself to talk about it." But it was interesting. This very person had very superficial relationships with men, and she found relationships boring. And it's because she never really revealed anything about herself other than what looked really good. And so it was really interesting working with her as she began to find the courage to look at those things. Um, Go ahead.
I was going to say, for some people who have experienced trauma on that kind of level, isn't it just a natural self-defense mechanism to bury that pain? Because sometimes to look at that and to realize what has happened, you've been violated. Uh, the, it's a violent thing that just happened to her, and to be
Yes.
able to look at that, it's just too painful. Like, our psyche is so fragile, and we can't face that, so we bury it, we mask it, we
It's
put a
it's
different
called
label on it.
it's called compartmentalization, and it's
Hmm.
actually a healthy ego skill. I
Hmm.
mean, if your dog had died this morning and your beloved dog, and you had this interview to do, you would probably compartmentalize that and come to work and do the interview, and then your grief is waiting for you.
Right.
So we all compartmentalize all the time. It's an ego skill. It's something we need to do so we can function. And the more trauma you have, the more you have had to compartmentalize. The problem is with these folks is that it's almost become unconscious. They don't think, "I need to not think about this today. I'm going to put this away." It just automatically zip goes down and gets stuffed in what's, I guess, their emotional closet, and gets suppressed and never is gotten out again and looked at and connected with. One woman told me, "If my feelings are too big for the box I've created, I'll build a bigger box." So, they are so frightened of their vulnerability and of what's happened to them that they have just developed the strategy of pushing that away. And again, my theory is that there can be cultural components to that, there can be environmental components to that, but there's also a big family component, meaning that you were probably reared in a family where that kind of vulnerability was ignored, mocked, ridiculed. You were a victim of abuse or trauma, or you were just told that, buck up, stop crying, or don't be angry. Maybe you grew up in a family where the only thing where you really got attention was for accomplishment. There are all kinds of roads to Rome, so to speak. But um, that's the strategy of, okay, if it hurts, I'll I'll push it away, and it becomes so automatic that it's unconscious. I want to make a point really quickly. The last thing I want people listening to this to think is what I'm saying is, "What are you talking about? People with classic depression are just weenies that they walk around moping and despondent all the time?" No, I know a lot of people who who admit they're depressed, who reveal they're depressed, who are incredibly courageous and work very hard to manage their depression. And there's even a thing called high functioning depression or smiling depression, which means someone knows they're depressed, but they still put a smile on their face. They still search for the right medications. They still exercise. They take care of their kids. Even though they know they fit the criteria for classic depression, they are still um, they're still putting on a happy face, so to speak. And those people will probably see themselves in perfectly hidden depression to a certain extent. The people I'm really trying to reach are the people that would say, I'm not depressed. I've got too many blessings. I would be ashamed of myself to say I was depressed.
Hmm.
I can't, that's those people have it so much more, so much more of a difficult life than I do. And so it's those people where this has become an automatic way of being, that they just get lost in the persona. They get lost in what they are creating, and then their pain goes unaddressed for years and years and years.
Okay, so for people who are just joining us late into this live stream, I just want to let you guys know who we're talking to. We're talking to Dr. Margaret Rutherford, and here's how you guys can get in touch with her. I'll leave this on the screen for a second. I also want to read a question. It's going a little bit off my plan or structure today, but I'm
Okay.
okay with that. I'm letting go of
Sure.
control here.
There
And
you
this
go.
question comes in from Joanna, and she says, or she asks, are there any ways we can inspire a creative team and the management to have more empathy besides modeling it by ourselves?
Empathy for depression, is that what she means?
I don't know. So let me read the
Read,
question
read,
one
read
more
the question
time.
one more time.
Yes. Are there any ways we can inspire a creative team and the management to have more empathy besides modeling it by ourselves? So I think she's looking for allies to teach everybody to have more empathy, but
Sure.
maybe she feels alone in this.
Sure. Well, what immediately comes to mind, Joanna, is that it sounds like sometimes you may be down, or you may feel very vulnerable about something, and you may still feel like you have to hide it because it would not be something that would be welcome on the team for you to say, gosh, I don't really know which direction to go now, or whatever it is. Whereas maybe having a supervisor that you say, I don't know where to go, I'm not sure which direction to go, and he or she would say, well, okay, sometimes we're all like that. We don't know where to go or what to do. And, how can I help you? I've felt that way myself. I can have empathy for that, where you find a colleague in realizing that, that we're not always on. We're not clicking constantly. It's just, uh, you can try to look like that, but even people who might experience or identify with perfectly hidden depression have self doubts. They have insecurities, but they have to hide it. And so, when I went on social media back in 2012, I had a big decision to make, because sometimes I would talk to my patients, for example, about I have panic disorder. In fact, I have performance anxiety. I've had it since my late 20s. I have a history of a severe eating disorder, and I don't obviously have it anymore, but I still deal with eating disorder thinking. And I've been married now for 30 years, but in that decade of chaos I was talking about a little while ago, I married twice and divorced twice. So, was I going to talk about that? And if I did, would I get ridiculed? Was there fear I'll get ridiculed? What are you doing being a psychologist on social media if your own life's been a mess, and
Mhm.
and you're still dealing with panic, and you still deal with eating disorder thinking? But actually, quite the opposite has happened. In fact, more, I don't know about the people who make, oh, well, she's a nut, I don't want to, listen to her. But there have been plenty of other people who said, I'm so glad that someone like you is saying, these are things I struggle with all the time. And I give, in my blog post and podcast, I definitely talk about, not not constantly about myself, but I will add in things about my own life that I know are hopefully can model. And so I don't know if you have a supervisor like that. Sometimes we don't, and sometimes they're just not open to that, because you know why? Probably they cannot be open about their own insecurity. It is a strong person, and a person that doesn't have to be right all the time, or doesn't have to pretend that they feel more secure than they do. to say, gosh, um, I'm just having a bad week or whatever it is, and giving you permission to do that too. Um, I hope that's a good enough answer to your question. I'm not sure it is, but it was my best effort.
That's good enough for us. But I do have a question related to this, which is
Sure.
I see this a lot. I see young people, especially, who have a very ideal way of living their life and how they want to be. And they're in a workplace where people don't share those same values and beliefs, and they feel really out of place.
Right.
My feeling is, it's a lot for you just to manage your own emotions, let alone try to get other people to change and be just like you. And I often advise people, hey man, just focus on job here, just take care of yourself, and then if you're in a bad place, look for other employment. But you're going to spend all your energy trying to change other people, and it's a very difficult thing to do. And you're going to wind up, I think, spending energy in the wrong place. That's just my opinion. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I would agree with that, Chris. I think that people don't change unless they really are looking to change.
Right.
They don't change for other people. They may change to please for a little bit of time,
Hmm.
but that change is not maintained. It takes the person saying, I like this change. I like myself better as this person who's changed, and I'm getting along in my life better. So I don't think you can change other people. Now, it's interesting that they would hire you, and your diversity is known, and they seem to welcome that, but maybe they get a little scared by that or something, when they're up close and personal to it. So, um, I think that y- y- you modeling acceptance of them, maybe they will then turn around and be more accepting of you,
Mm,
because you accepting that they're not going to get some things about you, maybe you don't get some things about them either. So, um, then you sit down and, if you have that kind of relationship, which is, in many workplaces not the case, where
right.
you can say, you can have an open conversation about that.
Yeah. But I love what you said there, which was you're thinking you want to change them and for them to be more empathetic. Probably the best way to do is start with your own empathy and kind of trying to
Exactly.
understand what they're going through. I love that. Oh,
Yeah.
that's good. Okay, let's keep going because we got to get through your 10 and then all the other
Okay.
stories that we need to talk about, right? See,
Sure,
the
sure,
90
sure.
minutes is going to go by fast. So here's the next one is the worry and need to control yourself. Hey, there it is. And your
Yeah,
environment. There
yeah,
we go.
yeah, yeah. Well, this one is, again, all of these are really commingled. It was a little hard to
Hmm.
disentangle them, in fact. But this
Right.
one is different because there's actually a cycle to the worry. What do you do? What do these folks tend to do when they're worried? They then tend to be responsible and take control. And then the more they're in control, the more they feel exhausted. And then the more they think their exhaustion is going to show. So the more they worry. And so then the more they have to look like they're in control.
Wow. Yeah.
So, it's this vicious cycle of worry and a need to look in control, because these are not people, for example, who will tell you they suffer with panic attacks, or that they tend to stay up at night worried about the virus or whatever it happens to be. They'll say, oh, yeah, I'm worried about it, but not any more than anybody else. And if because they don't want to look that out of control. Um,
Right.
so I worked with a man one time. He was very, so many of these people were very eloquent, and he had really struggled with the mistakes he'd made in his life, the things that made him look out of control. And one of the things, he'd had 3 affairs, and other than that, his life looked cookie cutter. I mean, he had
Hmm.
the perfect wife, he had the perfect family, he had the perfect job, he had the perfect house, but then he would get sort of this urge, and he would have affairs. Well, at the third affair, he got suicidal. But what was so poignant? He came in one time. I'd asked him if he had any pictures of himself as a little boy. And he brought in a picture, and he was about 6 in the picture. And I said, so what do you want to say to this little boy? Thinking he would say, you're going to be okay. You know, you're going to make mistakes. It's going to be okay. And what he
Right.
said was, don't grow up, because you will feel terrible about yourself because of the many mistakes you'll make.
Mm,
And it was so poignant. And his eyes filled with tears. And I said, is that what you want to say to this little boy in your healthier place? Or is that where he goes, no, that's not my healthier place. And so we really worked on what he would say to that little boy, given some of the things that he'd figured out. And it was that non-forgiveness, that harshness, that shame. Again, we've talked about the shameful critical voice, that shame that he'd made the mistakes that he had. And so it's really about trying to quiet that need to always look in control and realize you're not going to look in control all the time. You're not going to be in control all the time. You're going to really make a fool out of yourself sometimes.
Yeah.
And that's something that's just about being human.
Your story just triggered something in my mind. Do you have time to watch TV? Like
Depends.
Mad Men? Have you seen Mad Men out of curiosity?
I've seen a couple of episodes.
Okay, so that's probably good enough. I just want to throw this out there just to bring us to pop culture land a little bit here.
Sure.
So Mad Men, Don Draper, he's a
Yeah.
bastard. He grew up in a brothel, and he seemingly has the perfect life, the perfect wife, the perfect job, and he's climbing the career ladder really, really fast. But he has
Mm,
super self-destructive behavior. He can't stay committed to his relationships, and every
yeah.
time something good happens in his life, he'll do something to totally mess it up. And your story just reminded me of this person who has seemingly everything lined up, goes out and has an affair. Like they feel like they don't deserve it, and they want to
Right.
go back to the place of chaos.
Right. Well, remember that voice of shame. It can be saying to you, you don't deserve all this, like Don Draper. You don't, we know who you really are. We know what you're really like. And if anybody found out, you'd lose everything. And so these are the people that have to hide that part of themselves rather than saying, gosh, I get so overwhelmed trying to make my life look so perfect. And really let that lapse. I mean, maybe they don't love the wife that looks perfect or the husband that looks perfect. Maybe, there's some things about it that they wish they could change. But rather than doing that, they go about sort of secretly having this other life. And so um, it's what perfectionism does is and this kind of perfectionism uh, fueled by shame, is that it tells you it's not okay for you to look like you make any mistakes. It's as long as you can keep it secret, it's okay. But still, then I'm going to turn around and shame you for the secret you're keeping.
Mm,
So you can sort of never get away from the shame.
right.
Um, and it really takes going back to where you learned that you had to, again, in that brothel, where you develop this strategy of, I will not look like any of the people around me. I will look
Mm,
successful. I will look like I have everything put together. And that's where I'm going to build my sense of security. But the foundation is way too shaky.
yeah.
In fact, just a month ago, I had some people from Boca Raton, Florida, contact me. And one of them had a friend who had died by suicide recently. And she has 3 kids. She was successful, loved by the community, loved by her family. It was devastating to people. It just came out of the blue. And this happens a lot. In fact, I bet we can all think about someone that we know who looked like they had the perfect life, and then we hear they died by suicide. And the next thing out of this woman's mouth, I gasped and just couldn't breathe for a second. She said her husband found your book on her nightstand. And I couldn't breathe. I mean, I was like, oh, it made me even more determined that these people who feel like there's no way out but to leave the life that they have created that is so empty and lonely for them, that they don't realize that they could take apart that life or change it enough to where they could have some sense of true security and true connection with people. And it's just it is devastatingly tragic when this happens, and it's happening more and more, Chris. It's perfectionism. The rate of perfectionism and the rate of suicide is going up concurrently in our
Mm,
culture. In fact, in the international culture. So we've really got to address this.
There's this battle that creative people go through all the time, which is,
Hmm.
so are you saying just do sloppy work and put whatever, like just not a care, or to the opposite end of the extreme, which is I got to get every little detail just perfect, otherwise I'm not going to release something. This is a conversation that I'm not talking in a theoretical way. I'm
You have it
having
all
this
the time.
conversation with the team all the time, from young people to my managers. We're fighting this all the time.
Yeah. Well, when I hear that, where my mind goes is to say, insight, I've learned as a therapist that insight is wonderful. I mean, insight connects the dots, insight gives you a context. You understand, oh, you know, my stepmother or my stepfather or whomever threw away all my artwork and said that was a stupid thing to do. And so by damn, I became an artist and I'm going to be extremely successful. And so here comes the perfectionism of needing to create something that is astoundingly perfect. And then, as we said a few minutes ago, then you get caught up in the, well, what makes it astoundingly perfect, and you get paralyzed there. Where I really think that people start getting hope is when their behavior starts to change. When you do this black and white, it's either got to be totally perfect or it's just a slob job.
Right.
That's where uh, the irrational thinking is, um, that you have to confront. There is a vast middle, that there's going to be things that are really, really good about a piece or a sculpture or a painting or a piece of music. And then there are going to be things that are flaws in it. I'm sure I will watch this very recording and think, well, why didn't I mention that? And so, I'll watch it and go, oh, why didn't I think about that? So it's really beginning to try to approach it, and the task, whatever the task is, or the joy, or the goal, is that in the creation is realizing that it will be both. Again, if I'll go back to what I said a few minutes ago, your strengths don't define you any more than your weaknesses do, any more than your vulnerabilities do. So in your creations, your strengths will show and your vulnerabilities will show.
Right.
That's part of the artistic process. That's part of the creative process. So it's a part of any process. Um, and so I think it's hard to learn how to approach that, especially when you're younger, because you're hungry, you're literally and figuratively sometimes, and you're wanting to create a niche for yourself. And so, um, understanding that something that you think is a piece of schlock, somebody else may go, oh, this, I love this. And you're kind of going, what? And then something you think is outstanding, people just pass by. That's part and parcel of, trying, realizing that, I don't get to judge what other people see as wonderful or as perfect or as just what they wanted to hang in their living room. That's really not up to me to decide. What I can do is, if I'm okay as I can, as much as I can be, with what I produce, and then I don't let the achievement of producing that define who I am. I define the process. It's the process of creating that defines me. I'm a creator
Mm-hmm.
versus I'm defined by what I create.
I love that. Mm. Okay, I'm looking at the time here. See, it's already been an hour. See, it's flying by.
I
Now I
told
have
you
to
I
do
could
something.
talk.
Now I have to read a couple of more things, and so we'll kind of do
Sure.
these in bulk. And you
That
said
sounds good.
before, they're interwoven. So, okay, here we go.
Yes, there.
So here's another sign that you might be suffering from perfectly hidden depression, that you're intensely focused on tasks, using accomplishments to feel valuable,
We've really
that you
talked about that
focus.
already.
Yeah,
Hmm.
we did. So the focus on well-being of others, but don't allow them into your inner world. Okay.
Yeah, this is important because some people have asked me, well, does that mean that their focus is insincere? Absolutely not.
Mm-hmm.
Often these people have been through a lot of hurt and pain, and they They want to help someone who's in a fix or who's having pain. What they don't do, they don't allow you into what hurts them, or what they'll say something like, "Oh, if I started crying, I'd never stop," or "I'm just not a crier," or, "Oh, I tell you if something was wrong," when really they don't have any plan to do so. So
Right.
anyway,
Okay. Here's another one is to discount the personal hurt or sorrow, struggle with self-compassion.
no self-compassion. They don't even
Hmm.
know what that word means. Um, what do you mean? I'm supposed to feel sorry for myself? No. You're supposed to have the same kind of empathy and understanding for yourself that you have for other people.
Hmm. Okay. You mentioned this already, and you shared some of your own struggles with an eating disorder. There's an anxiety disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, or addiction.
Yeah, the clinician in me, Chris, said, I don't want to write this book without mentioning that the last thing I want to do is have someone read the book or hear about it, read the list, and say, oh, I have perfectly hidden depression,
Hmm.
period. Certainly there can be other, not real, because from my standpoint, perfectly hidden depression is real, but to have a clinical diagnostic category that you actually fit criteria for and just call that perfectly hidden depression, because there could be some real treatment that would be helpful to you. And so I wanted to put that in there because, and actually talk about that in the book, and how what about how that's different from perfectly hidden depression and how it may feel similar.
Right. Um, and you also said in the book that some of this in doses is actually really good. It's just when you go too far with this, that's
Sure.
when it gets into the dark side,
Sure,
right?
sure. Some of all of this can
Hmm.
be, I mean, uh, being responsible is great. Focusing on others sincerely is wonderful. Even sometimes discounting, you know, well, I'm not going to treat myself like I'm the center of the world, and because my feelings got hurt doesn't mean that I'm, need to make a big deal out of this. That's being humble, and that's keeping perspective and all that kind of thing.
Hmm.
But you're right. What happens is the there's not a balance at all.
Right. Okay, so here I think are the last two, and we already talked about this, which is to believe strongly in counting your blessings as the foundation of well-being. So there's never an opportunity for you to acknowledge that sometimes it's tough, and it's not, you don't always have to be grateful for some of the bad stuff that happens in your life, right?
Well, or even for the good stuff. I mean,
Okay.
for example, I wrote this book. I consider that a good thing.
Hmm.
I consider it. I'm happy about it. But has it brought some stress into my life? Yes. you know it's brought these interviews, which I love, but also I get nervous about. Remember that performance anxiety.
Hmm.
There's some struggles that come along with it. So although I'm grateful and really happy about the book, it's also brought some things that sometimes I have to fight against or struggle with, and that's just part of blessings. They have an underbelly.
Right. Okay, so this is number 10 here. Rounding out number 10 is enjoy success
Rounding out number
within
10.
professional structure, but struggle with emotional intimacy in relationships.
Yeah,
This
surprise,
is like
surprise.
the big one, right?
Yeah, it's these people are. What do? We reward perfectionism.
Hmm.
We reward people who stay late and come early. So these people are usually very, very successful professionally, and yet they've chosen partners. They've even maybe chosen friends who are fairly superficial, or perhaps they've chosen a partner who's fairly narcissistic and really wants them to take a lot of responsibility because the narcissistic one doesn't want to take responsibility, or they've been attracted to an underfunctioner, and the underfunctioner says, you go for it, you overfunction all you want to, I'm fine with that. But I will tell you that some of the most poignant emails I've gotten are from people who said, I've been married to my husband or my wife for 12 years, and um, I've never seen them cry over anything that's sad. I've never seen them let down. I've never seen them uh, integrate loss into their lives. And I try to talk to them about what's really going on, and they push me away or they isolate. I, you know, and so they say, so how do I approach them? And my answer is, tell them what it's like for you to watch them do that. Tell them I get I get scared about whether or not um, you're going you're going to be okay because I never see you be sad. I get lonely because we don't talk about anything other than what's for dinner and the vacation we're going to take with friends in 2 weeks. Um, so, or the kids or whatever. So, it's not always that they're attracted to people who are not capable of intimacy, but often they are as well.
Mm. Okay, so now we have an opportunity to talk to some of the people who've been watching this
Great.
live with us,
Perfect.
almost 300 people. And there's been a lot of positive reactions thanking us for bringing you on. You're wonderful, articulate, and the feeling, the feels, as the young people say. So, Mariana, this is a statement, I think, less a question, but maybe I can get your reaction to this.
Sure.
She's saying, when everything keeps going wrong in your life, especially things that are out of your control, it's hard to keep being positive. Negative thought just pours in. I don't know if this is depression.
Well, okay. My first reaction to that, Mariana, is that when negative things happen, things that are unexpected, things that you can't prepare for, that are sudden sort of a sudden loss, or you think one thing is going to happen and something else does, and it's disappointing or frustrating to you. There is what normally happens is a sense of disappointment or sadness or frustration or helplessness or confusion, agitation, whatever. um, it's not classic depression until you can't shed that feeling, that feeling stays with you and makes you not want to go to work and makes you be surly with your kids or makes you want to isolate, or all of a sudden you lose your appetite or you want to sleep all the time. Classic depression has these criteria that we can all have times when we're down or when things aren't going our way. I mean, look at what this pandemic we're all living through.
Right.
Every patient that I have, and myself, we're having days where it just seems so overwhelming to try to manage, and that we're sort of having this uh, uh, communal kind of depression or sadness or frustration in that, because everything is out of whack. But I think, the official criteria for depression is that you must have those symptoms for a certain amount of time. Uh, with dysthymia or moderate depression, it's 6 months, even to a year. Um, for major depression, which is much more severe, you have to have that for at least 2 weeks. And then the dive is noticeable to other people. That's also a huge difference between classic depression and perfectly hidden depression, because no one sees that you're any different than you normally are. So hopefully
Mm-hmm.
that's helpful.
Thank you. Very good.
I would encourage journaling about it. I would encourage trying to honor it by journaling. What are you disappointed? When have you been disappointed like this before? How did you handle that?
Mm-hmm.
How did you get yourself through that? To try to, if you've been around from the beginning, which I salute you if you have, you know, what are some of your strengths that you can call forth? Are you talking to a friend about it? You know, try to work through it on your own. And then if you are getting depressed clinically, then, sometimes you have to decide, I need to go to the doctor or I need to go to a therapist.
Yes, and in case you're joining us very late in the live stream, where I'm talking to Dr. Margaret Rutherford, and she wrote this book, Perfectly Hidden Depression. And there are a bunch of exercises in this. This isn't just a book about reading. It's a book about doing and putting into action the things that you've learned. So I just want to highlight a little passage here. And this is on page 13, and reflection number 1, creating a mantra of confronting shame and perfectionism. You give the prompt, ask yourself this question: what do I need to remind myself about? I'm sorry, let me read that correctly. What do I need to remind myself of every day about my healing work with perfectly hidden depression? Play with creating a mantra, a mental reminder, a positive goal or experience you want to have. And it seems like there's a bunch of these things in the book. So there's
Yes,
things that
there
you can
are.
do and apply, right?
The funny thing is, it's not really very funny. It's actually very poignant. Several of my own patients who are reading the book have said, I couldn't do the first exercise because I couldn't come up with a mantra that was going to be absolutely correct and absolutely perfect. And I've said, so that's your mantra. Your mantra is, I want to be able to create a mantra that isn't perfect.
I love that.
That's your mantra.
Hmm.
So, you just take yourself where you are,
Hmm.
and that becomes where you want to go. I want to be able to create a mantra that I know isn't perfect. There you go.
Hmm. That's
Accept
beautiful.
yourself where you are.
Hmm. Here's a couple of others in the book. Whatever time it takes is time well spent.
That's right.
Because there's a lot of that. There's a lot of people who say, "How do I know I'm doing the right thing?" Or "This is taking too long," or "It's going too fast." Well, it's gonna take what it's gonna take.
That's right.
Another one in the book. I'm going to relish discovering what I write. That's
Mm.
also very beautiful.
Well, thank you. I've
Hmm.
done a fair amount of journaling in my lifetime, so it's been very, very helpful to me to. It's sometimes very jarring or upsetting to see in black and white how you really feel. And
Right.
some people say, I don't want to do that because it makes it more real. But it also actually helps you track where you are and your progress, and helps you move through things instead of being stuck in one place. Actually, you get tired of writing the same stuff over and over again. So you say, well, that's what I said yesterday. What else do I think about this? And so it helps you move through emotions and experiences.
Oh, that's nice. I'm going to share something with you. When I was a teenager, I was just an emotional roller coaster, very different than the way I
Mm,
am today. And I remember I did write in a journal, but I had some strange, dark thoughts about my journal I have to share with you, which is I wrote it in a way that I almost wanted my parents to read it
yeah.
because there was this thing like this feeling that teenage angst, like you just don't understand me. How could you do this to me? That kind of victimization, self pity. And I wanted to write these dark thoughts, even though I think I was just being very dramatic in case somebody would read it.
Yeah.
What's going on with me there?
Well, obviously, you didn't feel that your parents were very attuned to you. And so you were coming up with these scenarios of, well, if I really look out of control, if I look really dark, if I look really despondent, then maybe my parents will tune into me enough and they'll read this journal. And I mean, if you really felt that way, or even if you felt like you needed to act that way, that'd be something that with a more open kind of relationship between you and your parents, you could have gone, Mom, sometimes I want to make up a problem because I get frustrated that you're not paying more attention to me.
Mm,
There you go. So, the fact that you were hoping that this would happen is it's very poignant. It's very meaningful, because I would contend that if you were sitting in front of me as a patient, I would say, so tell me the things that they were missing about you, that you knew they were missing about you, and go from there. And then you almost had to make that worse. But why did you have to make it worse? Probably it was bad enough for what it was, and they still just weren't tuned in, or they were too busy, or maybe they were working three jobs to put food on the table. I don't know. I'm not trying
right.
to throw your parents under the bus, but something was happening to where there were parts of you that you didn't feel like they saw. So you had these fantasies about making it worse. You don't diagnose a teenager with a lot of uh, di- diagnostic or diagnoses, because being a teenager is in itself very chaotic and very emotional. And so, but I think that, I don't know if that rings true with you, that there were things that your parents weren't tuning into, or maybe they expected you to be better than you were, or somehow they had a lot of, they wanted you to accomplish a lot, and you were trying to say, no, I'm really suffering. I'm not sure what the hidden message was. And you're supposed to
Yeah.
spill your guts and tell us.
So look, between the ages of 13 and 16, I'm not going to lie to you. We've talked about this in smaller intimate circles, but I've had thoughts of suicide. I was fantasizing about how to kill myself. And
I'm so
I was
sorry.
just, I mean, I will obviously work through it. I have a loving relationship with my parents, but the thing that you said about mom, sometimes I feel like I want to act up so that you can pay attention to me. That would have a level of self-awareness, emotional maturity, and communication that just did not exist at that time.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
obviously Asian American. The idea of therapy, that's not even a word that you say at home. Men being vulnerable, crying, that's not a good thing. There's a
Mm-mm.
lot of things that were already in place for it not to happen.
Sure.
I'm a middle child of three boys. I mean,
Oh,
look,
you were
I have had a
invisible. You
yeah,
were
I had
invisible.
a I love my parents. Everything's fine now, but back then it was rough. It was very
It's
rough.
interesting because I didn't find this out until last week, but I guess my publishing company has been selling the foreign rights to translate the book. The place that had a bidding war on the book so far is Korea.
Wow.
And it was sold for thousands of dollars, where the other
Hmm.
ones are just 1,000. I don't know exactly if that's good or bad, but
You pay
thousands of
us.
dollars because
Yeah.
they said, "Oh, this is going to be a highly popular book in Korea because that's that Asian
Yeah.
environment of you have to be exactly what we need you to be and who we tell you
Hmm.
you're going to be is very prominent." So I need to learn more about Korea for
Hmm.
sure because they want me to
Have
write a
you been
preface. So
have you been to Japan before?
I've not been to Japan. I've been to China, but I've not been to
Okay.
Japan.
All right. I've been to Japan a couple of times. I love Japan, but Japan, I've got to imagine that there's going to be a bidding war there too, because
Maybe.
that's a structure or society that's just all about doing your part. And what we
Mhm.
saw and what we witnessed were men who would go to work like all day, like we're talking about like 12-hour days, and afterwards they are just hating their life, and they would just drink themselves
Drink.
crazy
That's
and
what
just
I've
be
heard. The bars are
in the streets,
packed at
vomiting,
night.
passed out on the floor in a full three-piece suit, and it's a horrible life. And then what they
I've
do
heard
is
that.
they don't go home. They check themselves into these capsule hotels where they can just sleep in their clothes, their work clothes, and just get right back and do the grind. They're called salary men. They just show up every single
Salaryman.
day. Yeah, there's even a term for them. And when we walk by, and my friend who is Taiwanese originally, but he's lived in Japan for a number of years, is fluent. He's like, how you look at them, and he's like shaking his head. It's so sad. And
Yeah.
there's thousands and thousands of people doing this. And that's why he said to me, to kind of explain a little bit of Japanese culture, why some of the men are into some really kinky, weird stuff, because there's just no joy there. It's just
Oh, that
going
makes me
through
so
this whole
sad.
thing.
And it makes me sad for their families as well, not just them.
Yeah.
But yeah, I had heard about the drinking issues in Japan. And but supposedly the suicide rate is very high in Korea.
Oh,
So
I
I'm going
see.
to look into that as well.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is a comment from a guy, Franklin Andrade. I think that's his real name. What's a good way to appear vulnerable and being okay with not being always in control or having every answer in front of people at work that don't value and even punish any kind of vulnerability?
Hmm.
Oof.
Ooh, well, um, my husband, who works in a corporation, said I would last 3 hours in a corporate environment if I tried to work there. So, um, frankly, I don't know if there's a very good answer to that question because
Hmm.
if the policies and the zeitgeist of the environment is so rigid and um, that none of that is allowed, then you trying to find it there or establish it there is probably not even safe for you. I would, some of the corporations are beginning to get more uh, empathic toward this. I live in Fayetteville, Arkansas, and just 30 minutes from us is the international headquarters of both Tyson and Walmart. So I get a lot of people from those two huge organizations as patients, and certainly they've talked about this that you don't let them see you sweat, and the rigors of what is expected of you are incredible, and so. I'm not going to give you the glib advice of, well, just quit your job, because obviously you can't. You may have all kinds of financial reasons that are very serious to be there, but I would definitely try to find relationships outside of work that do meet that need in you and that desire in you, so that at least you have enough of it until perhaps you're in a place where you can consider changing your environment, your work environment, because at least you'll be getting that, at home or with friends or with family or just somewhere where you get those needs met.
I love that you said that. In ideal world, our personal life, our relationship, our spiritual life, and our work life would all be in perfect alignment. We know that's not the case. There's
Mm-mm.
hope for us in the future that this is actually more accepted in by talking about it, by sharing the stories that you have in the book and
Sure.
talking about it openly. Hopefully, we remove some of the stigma around being vulnerable. And I think everybody needs at least one person in their life that you can just say, "Here's who I am. See me for who I am," and we accept each other and we grow together. but it doesn't always have to happen at work or some other place. But you do need to find somebody. And if you don't have somebody, you got to reach out to somebody like you, right?
Well,
Get some
hopefully,
help.
yeah. I think that, I mean, I've had a lot of people who are in that world come to me and say, this used to fit exactly who I wanted to be and who I needed to be, and it just doesn't anymore. But I'm
Hmm.
having a struggle because I'll have to give up. There'll be sacrifices financially, or I need to work with my partner about this, and that those are tough, life altering decisions. But you deciding how important it is in your own life. And all I'm here to remind everyone, not in a dire way, or, well, I don't know. eh, I don't want to de-stress it. I just don't want to sound like I'm being dramatic, but suicide rates are going up. And so in every age group except 65 and older. So, and not to make anybody feel guilty, but remember that your children are learning from you as well. And if you aren't vulnerable, if you aren't talking about um, what you're struggling with, or what is hard for you, or um, what you feel joy about, I mean, if you're not allowing yourself to show your emotions as they occur to your children appropriately, then your children will model their lives after you. And so when they get depressed or when they feel overwhelmed, they won't talk about it either.
Hmm.
So, you have to meet out um, what what are the gains you're making financially or in stability, but what is that costing you? And remember that that cost, the emotional cost of being in that kind of environment also has a price. It has a very tangible price. And so I would encourage you to look at that and think, yeah, I'll never forget these people who came in one time and they say, first thing we want to tell you is we're downwardly mobile. And they had run this huge advertising agency, and they took it apart because their family was falling apart because of it. And they really wanted to change the whole feeling in their family, and what they were teaching their kids was important. And um, I mean, that was their decision. And of course, we've all got to make our own, but it's really, that sense of um, meaning and fulfillment. It may seem like, oh, meaning and fulfillment, well, that's not going to put food on the table, but the food you actually have at the table with your children will be more joyful, if you can um, know that you spend a great deal of your day doing things that truly are valuable to you, and teach your children what you want to teach them.
I have a confession.
What?
Mm. Okay, I'm gonna just confess to you right now.
All right.
I I struggle with this. That I have an allergic reaction to people who are super needy, who have this hole in their life that they're always seeking approval from other people,
Mm-hmm.
and so they're constantly needing to be other validated. And I find that to be it's overwhelming for me. So, and there's a lot of people I know in my life and my world, both intimate and relationships from afar. Like, oh, I just can you just tell me my work is good enough? And I was like, if you're always seeking that, you'll never. There's that hole will never be filled. You have to learn to love
Mm-mm.
yourself. So when I feel that about other people, and then I internalize that as my own dialogue to say, I don't want to be that person to other people. I don't want to tell them everything I'm going through. And I'm like, I think most men, pretty good at compartmentalizing. I would come home from work back when it was super stressful for me. And my wife could tell, there's something going on behind those glasses of yours or mine. And she's like, hey, how's your day? But instead of telling her, I would just, like you, I just need a minute. I got to deal with some stuff internally, and I'll stare at the TV screen for a while, and then I'll process what I have to go through. And the reason why I do this is because when I tell her, the emotions get stirred up again, the toxic energy goes back up. And not only being a very good partner, she starts to feel the anger, the frustration, and then she goes into problem solving mode. I'm like, it's too much. I don't want to live, work at home. I could process this. I can get through this. And then she starts to feel you're getting really distant. Like, who are you? Where are you in
Sure.
there? And then
Sure.
when you said this whole thing about what kind of model are you making for your children. And I have two little boys. I have a 16-year-old and a 14-year-old. I'm processing it. I think I'm fine, but I don't want them to go through their life thinking this is the way that men behave. You bottle everything up. There's no vulnerability. There's no struggle. There's no pain. What should I do here? This is a complicated thing.
Well, the first thing I notice is the either orness of what you're saying, Chris, is that I've got to spill everything, and and then I will look like I'm highly needy, rather than saying, you get home, if you had a watch my language, you've had a bad day,
Yeah.
and so if you come home and you start crying and you start going, I can't believe, or not even crying, maybe just being angry, probably what most men would do, and just say, I had a stupid day. I can't believe my supervisor is just as ignoramus, and all these people are wanting something from me, and blah, 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 blah. And so, instead of saying and beginning to practice with your partner, that there is a way of saying, I want to talk to you about what happened at work today. Now is not the time. Can we talk about it after we get the kids to bed? And so you honor the fact that there's something you want to share with her that was difficult for you. And you begin to practice what it's like to take apart something that you're afraid sounds needy. You're telling yourself, I'm going to look needy, rather than saying, I'm going to change this cycle between me and my wife, because as soon as I back off and withdraw, and she gets angry because she can tell something's wrong, she feels abandoned. She feels like I'm turning away from her help. And here we go down this cycle. So if you want to change your part of the cycle, which is only the part that you have control over, is to begin to practice not telling yourself you're needy, saying you're human, and something has really stirred something in you. And so then you give it some time, you go through your night, and then either the next day or that night, or whenever the two of you decide to talk about it, you pull it out again. That's reconnecting with that thing you've compartmentalized. And you say, all right, this is what I experienced yesterday. I'm really scared that you're going to think I'm really needy by talking to you about this. And I hate the idea that I might look needy. And she's going to go, Chris, I just want to know you. I mean, we women love to be known. We want to know our spouses or our partners. And so you say, you go, oh, well, all right. And this is what caused this. And then you just say, I don't want you to solve the problem. I just needed to let you know that that's what was wrong with me when I walked in the door. Can I do anything for you? Yes, you can rub my back or give me a hug or whatever it is. And then what you've done in that moment is you've broken this cycle that you just identified. I tell people, I see a lot of couples, and I say, I bet you can tell me that switch roles, and you do what your spouse says, and you do what the other spouse says. I want to hear you have this argument or this discussion, but take the role of the other one, and they can do it. They can keep on and keep on. Oh yeah, this is when he says, and this is when she says, and blah blah blah. So you're risking changing that cycle. And when you begin to practice that, it can get easier and easier. Not that it is easy, but you have to quit judging yourself that somehow you're like those terribly needy people, and just say, well, I'm scared that I'll look like this, but I'm going to risk this. And she doesn't go, oh my God, Chris, I can't believe you're talking what it says about something like that, because she wouldn't say that. And so, but that's what you're telling yourself, she'd say.
Sure.
So, you admit what you fear, and you don't project onto the other person what you tell yourself you're scared of hearing. And then she gets a chance to be there with you, and then y'all get a chance to practice. It will maybe not go perfectly, but you'll begin to change the cycle. And then guess what happens? The next time she has a day when she feels overwhelmed, she's going to much more be able to say, can I talk to you later about what happened this afternoon? Yeah, I could tell something was wrong. Well, and so you begin to have these moments of connection that are and you're getting out of the habit of avoiding what you fear and what you're projecting onto the situation.
I love that. So let me summarize what I heard. The
Yes,
first part is, if you need a minute, speak that,
take
articulate
it
that, to
and
say,
say it.
you know what, there's something I'd love to share with you that's happened. I'm going through some stuff, but now's not a good time. Why don't we find a moment when I'm in a better mental place to talk to you? It
Right.
might be tonight, it might be tomorrow, but it will be sometime, I promise you. And then the second thing that you said, which was, I want to share this with you, but I don't want you to feel like I'm needy or I'm desperate or any of these things. And
No, you can't determine what she feels. You could say, I'm scared you're going to think I'm needy.
oh, okay. So I'm scared that you're going to think that I'm needy or desperate. And what would be most helpful for me is for you just to listen. And
Bingo.
I'm not looking for a solution per se. A hug would be more than enough for me.
Right. Bingo.
Did I get that right?
You did.
Okay. Now, my
And
only question for you is, where have you been all my life? Where were you in those difficult first 5 years? Because those first 5 years after the honeymoon period, it was rough. It was rough. But we got through it.
I'll never forget standing in the kitchen one time. And my husband is not the most in fact, he's not psychologically oriented at all, which is an interesting choice of mate for me. But that said, one time we were having our usual, it wasn't a knockdown drag out, but it was definitely a kind of thing. And he stopped the conversation, and all of a sudden he looked at me and said, "What are we really fighting about?" I was floored. I was like, "Oh my God, living together has not, it's actually made an impact on him." And I said, "Well, I'm not sure, but let's figure it out." Well, sure enough, we were really fighting about trust or control. I can't remember now what it was, but to realize that there's a lot of stuff underneath. How many times have you heard somebody say, "I'm not sure what we were arguing about. It doesn't matter anymore." That's because they were arguing about something that was under the surface.
Mhm.
So, having those kinds of conversations and moving your relationship toward that ability is something that it lends so much more depth to your relationship. You know, I'm not somebody who thinks every time you come home you've got to bare your soul to your mate, and sometimes we got to take out the garbage and we got to do the dishes, and there's algebra homework, and there's laundry and blah blah blah. But it just has to happen enough. It has to happen enough where there is a connection, that intimate connection that I said perfectly hidden depressed people don't have.
I realize now here we are past the 90-minute mark, so I'm going to ask you for one quick question and one deeper question. Is that okay?
Sure.
And then we're going to say thank you and goodbye. So the first question is this: if you can't afford to see a therapist, are there any other options?
Of course. I mean, there are all kinds of self-help books. I will say that with the onset of online therapy, it's much less expensive than normal talk therapy. It's not covered by insurance, I think, but I bet that's about to change, actually.
Right.
And so there's online therapy. There are graduate schools that have programs that literally you pay $2 a session because you're getting experience for a graduate student. And I don't know how many clients I saw in graduate school. Hopefully I did no harm, but you could get it for relatively nothing. There are community health centers that have mental health. I volunteer in a community health center where people can see me for nothing. So there are things that are out there, but you can try to build a network of friends where y'all don't just talk about what's superficial or what's on the surface. I can't tell you how many people I've asked, "Okay, I want you to really tell one person that you're in therapy." "Oh, no, I can't do that." "Well, just try." Well, sure enough, the person will say, "Oh, I was in therapy last year and I'm still on antidepressants, but it was really helpful." Or, I didn't like my therapist. "Do you like your therapist?" And here comes this conversation about, oh, it's okay for us to admit we have problems. And there are a lot of self-help books. Mine is one of them. But, if you have a history of trauma, you really have to be careful because you're trying to unearth a lot of things whose roots are very deep. And There are kinds of therapists now who, it's EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing therapy. That's known to be a fairly brief, solution oriented kind of therapy for trauma. So you might look for an EMDR therapist, and look for therapists who will work with you about money. Not all therapists will. A lot of therapists don't even take insurance anymore, but there are people out there who will say, listen, you can pay me $10 a week for 3 years to finish paying off this bill. It's okay with me, just so you do it.
A lot of resources there. I didn't know that there were that many. Okay,
Yep.
this is fantastic. So here's the last big question. I'm
Okay.
going to ask it. Take as much time as you need to think about it. And if you don't like the question, you can say never mind, and we'll end the show. Okay, but then I want you to look right into the camera and to deliver this,
Okay.
because I think this is going to be one of many cut downs that we're going to have. I personally believe that perfectionism is a self-destructive belief that creative people have. Forget about depression and all this other stuff, because they're always trying to pursue this thing. The negative self-talk that comes out of this, the paralysis that happens, this idea that you will never put anything out there as part of your progress versus like your final result. That thing is probably the number one thing that's messing up a lot of creative people. So I would love to get your thoughts on that, to look right into the camera and speak to that person who's feeling this, like, I don't want to put this out. I'm not going to finish that thing. I need 3 more weeks to do this thing. I would love for you just to speak to them right now.
I've never known anyone who didn't feel like a new behavior was risk. It takes a lot of courage to take a risk. And if part of your issue is, as Chris describes it, that I have to be able to tell myself that something is the absolute best I can make it before, or I just trash it. I don't do it. I put it off. I miss the deadline. Um, and courage to risk takes a lot of courage. And so, what I would say that, when else in your life have you discovered that you had courage? Maybe your best friend's father died when you were in the 4th grade, and you were the kid that went over to your friend and said, you know, you want to go for a walk? Or where did you find your courage, and how have you found it in the past? I bet you can find something in your life where you have found courage. And I know, having been a singer myself in my lifetime, that you don't get a lot of steady, unless, of course, you're very successful, you don't get a lot of steady affirmation from the world. And so you have to find it yourself. Um, you have to surround yourself with people who are more positive, who aren't also, find a mentor who can help you find that courage to say, it's more important to put out the work and to be a creator than it is to always be completely sure that your creation is going to be exactly what it needs to be for other people, because you cannot control that. You cannot control what other people are going to think is going to be wonderful. All of you out here who have listened to this, some of you will go, I really enjoyed it. Other people go, she talked too much about X, Y, or Z. I have no control over that. And yet I've risked. And I would challenge you to risk and begin to think about the idea that is more important to create and be in the process of creating than to achieve some goal that you've got in your head that must be met for you to be accomplished. And if you keep on with the process of creating and you find the courage to do that and you risk, then I don't know where that will lead you, but you won't be paralyzed. That's what I would have to say.
Woo! Wow. Okay. How do people get in touch with you or find out more information about the different things that you're doing, Margaret?
Sure. My website's drmargaretrutherford.com, not very creative, but to the point. Again, my podcast is the Self Work Podcast with Dr. Margaret Rutherford. What it is they're usually about 25 minutes long, and it's me picking a subject. I always read a listener email. So I've been doing it for about 4.5 years, almost 4 years now. So I love doing it. I'd love to have you there. I'm on Instagram at Dr. Margaret Rutherford. Um, I have a Facebook page, facebook.com/Dr. Margaret Rutherford. And I have a closed group, which is facebook.com/groups/self-work. So that's facebook.com/group/self-work. And my email, my infamous email is askdrmargaret@drmargaretrutherford.com. And I'm the only one who sees those. It's quite confidential. I'll do my best to answer you as quickly as I can. I thank all of you for being here. Thank you, Chris and Mo. Thank you, Mo, for setting me up with Chris. I really appreciate it. And I'm very honored that you had me, Chris. You are delightful. And I love the fact that you're willing to share yourself. That means so much to people and to me. And I'm delighted to have been here. And whatever we have created is imperfectly perfect.
Way to end that. Thank you so much. Thank you for your generosity, and thank you for everybody that's tuning in, watching live. We hope you got some value from this, and on behalf of the entire team, Dr. Margaret Rutherford, thank you very much for doing this with us.
You're
Thank
more
you.
than welcome.
Okay, Jonah, get the music ready. Here we go. Let's get out of the show. And this is all the information that you need in case you guys couldn't fully understand everything that Margaret was saying. It's drmargaretrutherford.com, and she's active on Instagram, Dr. Margaret Rutherford. And shockingly, she gave you her email address, which be prepared for the onslaught, the avalanche that's about to happen. Jonah, get the music. Here we go. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, you guys. Hit the bell for notifications. Thank you, everybody, for being part of our 1 billion mission. You know what we're trying to do, change 1 billion lives on planet Earth. Thank you very much, everybody. I'm out of here. Hope you guys have a great weekend. Bye.